All right, well, it's good to see everybody here this morning. So once again, welcome to the online citizenship class. We are starting, of course, the second part of the class, which will be the final 5 weeks, and that will be talking about what we call the N400, the application and the interview. So again, we will review some things from the N400, starting with this particular lesson, and we will continue until December with this particular topic. So, as we said before, the final 5 weeks are going to be looking at these different sections of the N400 application. But what's also important to remember is that there are lots of vocabulary words and some grammar ideas that we need to talk about if you're going to do well on the interview. So each week we will be talking about many of these things to help prepare you for those particular issues on the interview. Okay? So as we said before, we will be discussing some of the questions they will ask you. And in the final week, which will be in December, we will look over the MyUSCIS website. So again, I don't know if everyone here in the class is going to be applying for citizenship soon, but generally, the MyUSCIS website is where you would begin the application process. So in the final week of the course, we will be looking at the MyUSCIS website. We do have a link to the website at our citizenship website, so you can go over and look at it. But again, we will look at it more in a few weeks. Now, once again, let's review the 3 sections of the test, of the interview. So again, starting this week, we're talking about the N400 application. Now, that application has questions about everything in your life, most of them within the last 5 years. Remember that number 5, that 5-year window, is very important for students who are applying. But there are some questions, a few, that will talk about your whole life. So again, thinking about being married, for example, or some of the activities maybe from your country. Those are questions we will talk about probably in the next couple of weeks. Now, I want to make sure you understand where it says here that you must be honest in all of your answers. That is so important. Let's circle that so we understand. You must be honest. So you cannot lie. You have to tell the truth during this interview. If you don't tell the truth and they find out, you will never become a citizen. So that's why it's so important to make sure we understand everything on the application and to make sure that we answer everything honestly. Okay, so again, no lying. You've got to tell the truth during the interview. Okay, now I know you're truthful people, so hopefully that won't be a problem. Now, we've already talked about some of the other sections of the interview. So again, the English test, that's what we talked about in the first few weeks. So you have to write a sentence, and remember, you have to read a sentence. So we've already discussed that part in the previous few weeks. And then, of course, the first 8 weeks of the course, we practice with the history and citizenship interview. So again, those are the questions about American history, government, and otherwise that you have to answer. And remember, that part of the interview, you've got 10 chances, and you must answer 6 of those questions correctly. Okay? So again, this final part of the class, we are talking about the N400 application. So that's what we'll be focusing on in these last few weeks. Now, I do want to mention here, again, to be honest in your answers, but here in our class, so me, for example, we are not going to ask you any particular personal information that might be sensitive. So, for example, I'm not going to ask you your permanent resident ID number, and I'm not going to ask you your social security number. So again, those are things that I'm not going to ask you, me. But remember, you need to know that information during the interview. So you need to try to memorize, okay, right up here in your brain, your social security number and permanent resident ID number 2. That's what we call your green card, right? What you find on your green card. So you got that information when you became a permanent resident. But remember, Many of these questions are going to ask about sensitive information. So that's something you need to remember when it comes to answering questions in the application. Okay? Now, before we begin, I just want to make sure everyone understands something, because sometimes students have questions that they ask me and I am not always able to answer them. And one reason is this. So I have to give this information now, okay? So everyone just listen. We, the teachers of this course, we are not official representatives of the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. So I do not work for the government. I do not work for this organization. And I am not a lawyer either. So again, sometimes students have legal questions about their status. So I'm going to tell you right now that I cannot help you with any specific legal issues. So if you have some problem with some document that you can't find, or if you're not sure specifically what you need to answer in the interview about your legal situation, I cannot answer any specific questions. Okay, so again, I'm not a lawyer, but most of the time I can answer general questions. So keep that in mind. If you have a specific issue, please don't ask me during the class. Generally, I can help with some things, but if you have any particular issues about legal problems, you probably should talk to a lawyer. Okay, so again, I can help you understand the information on the application, and I can answer any general questions you may have. Now, finally, sometimes I've had students use lawyers to help them fill out the information. So remember, if you have a lawyer who helps you, or anybody else who helps translate or provide any sort of assistance, there is a place on the N400 where you must give that information, okay? That's at the end of the application. So we'll talk about that during the last week of the course. But just remember, guys, I'm not a lawyer, okay? And I don't work for the federal government. So if you have any specific questions that might refer to legal issues, I can't help you, okay? Do we all understand that? Does everyone understand that? You can put yes in the chat box if you understand, okay? Okay, so does everybody understand it?
Not
Yes?
really understand
Okay.
because my computer have something problem suddenly out, and then I log in again. But no problem.
Okay, well you're here now, right?
Yeah, I can hear now.
Okay. Well, I just want to make sure everyone understands. So that's important because again, I cannot answer specific questions. I can only answer general questions. Okay, so Belisario, do we understand?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Belisario. All right, so I just want to make sure everyone understands that. Okay. Okay, all right, so good. Okay, well, let's go ahead and begin with our second half of the session and begin to talk about what we need to know for this part of the interview. Now, guys, we're going to start with a grammar point today, and the idea that we're going to look at is called the present perfect. Okay, everyone, let's say that together. Present perfect.
Present perfect.
Present perfect.
Perfect.
Now, I know that depending on what language you speak, so for example, Gisela, we speak Spanish. I know that in some particular languages, maybe we don't use the present perfect very much. So Belisario, Gisela, for example, maybe you use it in Spanish, maybe not. But we do use the present perfect in English. And in fact, we use it a lot, probably more than many other languages do. Now you might say, well, Mr. John, what is the present perfect? Well, let's take a look. So on the application itself, there are many questions that use the grammatical form, the present perfect. So let's look at an example here. So many of the questions use this particular idea. Have you ever been? Okay, now everyone, let's say that together. Have you ever been?
Have you ever been?
Have you ever been?
Yes. So you will see many questions use that particular idea. Now, if you've studied the present perfect before, you might remember that the present perfect has two parts. We have what's called the helping verb. Now, in some languages, we might call it the auxiliary verb. In English, most English speakers would call it a helping verb. That is the word have. I want to be clear here because one problem you can see already is that the word have actually has a couple of different meanings. So, for example, when I say, and I'll put it on the chat box, for example, if I say I have a dog, for example, that meaning of the word have is different from this meaning, okay? So let's not get these two words confused. So if I say, for example, I have a car, or I have a pencil, or if you ask your friend, do you have any money? Right? And then your friend says, no, I don't. The idea is that's a different meaning. This meaning of the word have is being used as a helping verb. So the idea is we often use this to talk a lot about our experiences. So if you notice the word have is the helping verb, and then we also use what's called a past participle. Everyone, let's say that together. Past participle.
Participle.
Past participle.
Okay. Now, maybe you've studied this before, but for example, the word been, right, been, is the past participle, and I'll put it in the chat box here, of the word be. So when we have be and then we have been, that would be an example of the past participle of the word be. Okay, now let's do just a couple, just to see if we know these answers. For example, does anybody know the past participle of the word go?
Went, go.
Okay, you're close there, Elena. Went would be the simple past. Would be the simple past. So that's your pretty good guess.
No.
Yes,
Gone?
congratulations. It's gone. Yes. So there you go, Elena.
I told it.
And Saba, there you go. Yeah, so for example, if I said, have you ever gone? Gone would be the example of the past participle. Okay? Now, as you know in English, these are kind of crazy, right? A lot of these grammar ideas are very crazy. So, for example, be is been, right? Go is gone. Let's try maybe one more. If I said see, does anybody know what the past participle
Seen?
of see is?
Seen?
Yeah, congratulations. Seen. Okay. Now, of course, what we are talking about are what we call irregular verbs. Now, for example, Spanish, French, they have many of the same irregular verbs that English does. But English, of course, has many, many irregular verbs. Now, on the interview itself, most of the time, they will use the word been as the past participle, but they will often use just regular verbs too. So, for example, in this first example, have you ever been? Many of these questions are asking kind of yes or no questions, okay? Now, another example of using the present perfect is when we talk about time. So often you will see on the application, how long? So look at these first questions. Okay, now everybody, let's turn on our microphones and let's practice these questions. Okay, are we ready? Let's try the first one. How long have you been married? Everyone, let's try it. Ready?
How long have you been
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 married.
married. Okay. Now, if you notice, how long is talking about a period of time, right? So in this case, been married, these words are kind of working together. Been is the participle, and married, of course, is kind of describing your condition, whether you're married or you're single. So in this case, if you're single, you would say, I'm not married, right? But if you had to answer the question, well, we'll talk about that in just a moment. Okay, let's try the next question. How long have you lived at this address? Everyone, let's try it. Ready?
How long have you lived at this address?
Address.
Empress.
Okay. So again, lived would be the past participle of the word live. So it looks a lot like the simple past. So that sometimes can be very confusing because many times the simple past looks exactly like the past participle, okay? Now, again, maybe you use the present perfect in your language, but in my experience as an English teacher, we use it a lot in English, but I have noticed in many other languages, you probably don't use it very much, okay? So just remember, English, this is one of those crazy areas that we use a lot. So let's look at a couple of examples of how to answer these questions. Okay, now guys, if you'll notice on the left side, we've got the question. Now, there are many different ways to answer this question correctly. So sometimes students ask me, Mr. John, if I give a complete sentence, does that mean my answer is better? Well, it might sound more formal. It might sound like your English is better. But again, you don't have to give the complete sentence. You can just give a short answer. So, for example, everyone, look at my first example here. How long have you been married? Now, notice the answer on the right side. You could say, for example, for 5 years, or you could say 5 years, or you could say, I've been married for 5 years. Okay? Now, again, I know some of you may not be married, but let's take a moment and practice this question. Okay? So, for example, Gisela, how long have you been married? Okay, so Gisela, try it again. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I have been married for 1 year and 3 months.
Okay, very good. All right, Elena, how would you answer that question? How long have you been married?
5. I have been married for 1 year.
Okay, very good. All right, so in this case, the idea is there are many different ways to answer the question. Now, if you're not married, of course, you would say, I'm not married, or I'm single. Now, remember, during the interview, the person who's interviewing you does have your application. So again, sometimes they might ask you questions just to test your English, okay? So even if you're not married, they might ask you the question, but generally they look at the information on your document. Okay, now let's look at this next question. This next question, again, these are all questions from the application. So for example, the next question says, have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? Now notice this is a yes or no question. So in this case, guys, I'm going to be clear. The answer needs to be no, I haven't. Because if you were a member of the Communist Party in your country, that could be a problem becoming an American citizen. So we'll talk about that when we see the question on the application. So in this case, if I ask you this question, have you ever been a member of the Communist Party, right? Saba, how would you answer this question?
No, I haven't.
That's it. So keep in mind, many of the yes or no questions, the answers probably should be no, because if you answer yes to some of them, you'll probably not become a citizen. So just remember, this question is definitely one you should say no to.
For sure, they will be afraid from the person if he was
Yes,
a member of the
yes,
community. Maybe
yeah.
he
So
has
keep
no
in mind,
troubles.
well, and keep in mind, Saba, when we talk about the question in the application, some students may come from countries where joining the political party might have been a requirement of the government. So again, if you're from China, for example, Cuba, these might have been countries that forced people, that required people to join the Communist Party. But the idea is you have to explain if this happened. So we'll talk more about that in the future. Okay, so when we see the question, go ahead, Elaine.
John, can I answer this question? Is I never.
Yeah, well, you can. You'll have the answer on the application, but you can just say no. Yeah, never. Yeah,
I never.
yeah, that's a good answer. Okay. All right, let's try the last question. Okay. So the last question to practice here is, how long have you lived at your current address? Now, notice you could say, for example, I've lived there for 6 months, for 6 months, or you could just say 6 months. Now, for example, for me, I've lived at my current address for almost 18 years. So a long time, okay? So again, your current address is where you are living now. So, for example, Elaine, how long have you lived at your current address?
4 years already.
Okay, good. All right. Belisario, how long have you lived at your current address?
Mm, almost 4 years.
Okay, very good. All right, that's good. That's good. That's a good long time to be at your address. Okay, so again, the idea is you can answer these questions in a few different ways. So the idea, of course, is all of that information must be on your application. You'll be answering those questions. So keep in mind, this is showing you that when they ask you questions during the test, they're really testing your English ability. Okay? All right. All right, now finally, I'm going to mute people again, okay, just for a moment. All right, so finally, another use of the present perfect is to talk about our experiences. Now, again, in the next few weeks, you will see these questions, but let's practice these questions together. Okay, so guys, everyone, let's turn on our microphones. Let's try these questions. Okay, so here we go. How many times have you traveled outside of the United States? All right, everybody, let's try it.
Yeah.
Ready?
How many
How many
times have you
times have you traveled?
Have you
traveled
traveled
Outside of the
outside
United
of the
States.
United States?
Now, many times students are worried about this question because maybe you've traveled outside of the United States a lot. Some of you may have visited your countries maybe every year. Anytime you are outside of the United States, and that includes Canada, Mexico, Puerto Rico, any of those places, you must put that information on the application. Now, we'll talk about this particular question in the future. But again, you have to have the dates, the exact dates of when you traveled. Okay,
Mr.
let's try
John.
the next question.
Mr. John,
Yes.
I know one guy. He didn't mention one date of his travel to outside of United States. He forgot. He didn't have citizenship.
What's that mean?
They noticed that he didn't mention the date, and he did travel outside of United, and he didn't mention in the form. So
Right.
they said no citizenship.
Yeah. So, guys, it's very serious. Now,
It's
let's.
serious.
Yes, it is. And actually, Saba, you can check with your it's a good idea to check with your passport, with your visa or whatever status you have to see. But remember, they already know all this information. They already know it. They want to make sure you're telling the truth. So Saba, that's why it's so important to go back and check every time you left the country. You need to have those dates written or somewhere. So that's why it's so important to make sure you go back and look through those last 5 years. Remember, it's always during the last 5 years, Saba. So that's what you need to be looking for. Now, when we get to that part of the application, we will talk more about it. But I just want to mention that to everybody here in the group. Yeah, you cannot forget anything because they already know the answer.
Sorry, forget. It's not forgot. Forget.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
But you're right. They have all of that information. Okay, they already know it. All right, let's practice the second question. Yes, question.
John,
Go ahead, Elaine.
is it we need to remember the dates, the correct dates when we go
Yes.
outside the United States? Okay.
You need to be very close. Yes. Now remember, you can check how many times you've left. You can check that through your passport. You should be able to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Again, when we get to that part of the application, we'll talk about it. Okay. Okay. All right, guys, let's practice the second question. Okay, so again, let's turn our microphones on. Let's try this next question. How many times have you visited your country in the last 5 years? Okay, everybody, ready? 1, 2, 3.
How many times have you
Times
visited
visited your country.
the last
the
5 years?
last years.
5 years.
Now, do you notice the last part? 5 years. Again, everything about travel on the application is within the last 5 years. Okay, now, real quickly, guys, can you remember how many times you visited your country?
Yes.
How many?
Twice a year.
Okay, so that would be 10 times?
But
Remember,
this
Elaine,
year,
it has to be 5 years. So tell me the total.
yeah,
What's the total? 8 times, 9 times?
To 5 years. Um,
Okay, you got
think
to
about that, right?
remember. Yeah, I know you got to think about it, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Elena, what about you? How many times have you visited your country?
I haven't visited my country.
Okay, so there you go. So that would be, of course, on the application. What about you, Saba? How many times have you visited?
Just one last December, just one
Okay, so
time.
just one
Yeah,
time.
one
Okay.
time. Yes.
Okay, good. Gisela, how would you answer that question?
No, I haven't yet.
Okay. Okay, good. And Belisario, what about you?
Mm, well, one time.
Okay, good. You got to think about it, right? Yeah, so everybody remember for the interview, you must be prepared. You have to know the answer to those questions. Okay, so Elaine, make sure you know. Make sure you
Yeah,
can
thank
count.
you. I noted down. Yeah,
Good,
thank you.
good. Well, don't worry. And again, guys, don't worry. I'm just giving you a little preview, a little view of the types of questions they're going to ask you. But again, each week we will look at different parts of the application and we will practice those particular questions. Now, just to kind of finish before we go to the application itself, so again, notice that the questions they ask, sometimes they might ask the questions in different ways. For example, the first question says, how many times have you traveled outside of the United States since you became a permanent resident? Now, remember, for most of you, that's going to be 5 years. Now, if you're married to an American, that might be in the last 3 years. But notice the question says, since you became a permanent resident. So notice I did not say in the last 5 years. So one of the things you need to notice is sometimes they will ask a question in a different way. So in this case, how many times have you traveled since you became a permanent resident? Well, your answers are the same answer. So for example, Elena, you would say, I haven't, Belisario 1 time. So the answers would be the same, right? But sometimes they don't ask the question in the same way. Notice again, though, in terms of answering the question, you could say 3 times, or you could say, I have traveled 3 times. Okay, look at the second question here. Now, notice this question is a little bit different. Again, when you look at the application, and when we talk about this part of the application, they will see each year if you've traveled or not. So, for example, they might say, how many times have you visited your country in the last year? Now, of course, if it's 2020, if it's 2020, the answer is probably 0 for many of us because maybe we haven't traveled. But notice the person's response here. I've been to my country twice in the last year. So that means in 2019, for example, or 2020. So again, the questions they ask might be a little bit different from the question the way it's written on the application. And sometimes they ask you specific questions about parts of the application. Now, guys, as we continue through the course, you will see these questions in those specific sections. We're not going to see them today, but I'm just preparing you because in the application, you will see the present perfect a lot. So like we said, we will highlight the use of the present perfect through these next 5 weeks because we will see it a lot, okay? All right, so guys, now we're going to go ahead and look at the application itself. Now, after we're finished here today, I will be sending you in your email a digital copy of the N400 so that you can start practicing at home. So what we're going to be doing here each week is kind of going through different sections of the N400. And the main parts of the N400 itself are sections 1 to 12. Those are the most important. And then, of course, the last parts are kind of our signatures and other things. But really, we'll be looking at 12 sections of the N400. So today we're going to be looking at the first 5, parts 1 through 5, okay? And again, the idea is as I walk through these different sections, my advice to everyone, okay, so this is my advice to everyone, is anytime you have a question, you need to go back and watch our videos because we're going to be going through a lot of information, okay? So that's the important thing is that as you go through the application, maybe watch the video again. especially here at kind of the halfway point of the video. Okay, well, let's go ahead and jump in. Oops, sorry, guys. Let's go ahead and jump into the application itself. Okay, now the application itself looks like this. Now, first off, has anybody seen the application? Has anybody actually begun filling out information on the application? Has anyone started on the N400?
No, Mr. John.
Not yet.
Okay. Yeah, sometimes I have students who are almost finished, and sometimes I have students who've never done it. So, okay, well, anyway, again, I'm going to walk through different sections of the application today. So again, there are 5 parts. Some of the parts are very short, so don't worry, it won't take too long. But some of them do require discussion. So again, the very first part, right here, I'm going to zoom in here so we can see it, is it talks about how to begin the process. So the very first part here, where it says start here, it asks a very important question. And that question is either your father or your mother, are they or were they a U.S. citizen before you turned 18 years old? Is that true of anybody in this class right now? Does anybody have a mother or father who was a U.S. citizen before you were 18 years old?
No, not me.
Not me.
No.
Okay, anybody else? So Belisario, Elena, were your parents citizens before you turned 18? No? Okay.
No.
Okay. Now that's
Mr.
generally the
John,
case. Yes,
But
ma'am.
Mr. John, if we have our mother or father, they are citizen. They are citizen. Automatically, I am citizen, American citizen.
Well, again, notice the question, Saba. It says before you turned 18. Sometimes I have students who,
Oh,
sometimes I have
yes.
students who maybe their parents became citizens after
Oh, yeah.
they were citizens. Yeah. So
Yes.
just remember, yes, if you were born in the United States, then you don't need any of this. If you were born in the United States, Saba, goodbye. You're finished with this class because you're already a citizen.
I understand. Yes.
Yeah. But the reason I have to ask the question for anybody is because if that's true, then you would need a totally different application. You would need what's called the N600. And the N600 is a very short document. So I just have to ask everybody right now, because if you said yes, then you probably should stop being in the class. So, but of course, most of my students usually say no. It's usually not the case. So again, here at the beginning, it says if your parents were citizens before you turned 18, you need to stop this document and do the N600. Okay, so does everyone understand? So in this case, this is not you. This does not apply to you. Okay? All right, so I have to ask that first. Okay? That's the first important question for everyone. Okay, now let's go ahead and look at part 1. Okay? Now, in the application itself, you will notice that the very first question asks about your eligibility. Everyone, let's say that word, eligibility.
Eligibility.
That's a hard word, isn't it?
Yes.
Now, eligibility means, are you able to apply for citizenship? And of course, everyone here, again, we're going to say yes, because that's why we're here in the class. But if you notice the very first question says you are at least 18 years of age. Okay, so everyone here is at least 18. And now this is where you notice that present perfect. Do you see it being used already? Have been. Do you see that? Yeah, all of these questions have been. Okay, so for example, you have A, B, C, D, and E. Now, most of my students would not be applying for C, D, or E. So for example, unless you are married to an American citizen, which you might be married to an American citizen. But notice that the question says that person is actually employed in another country. Well, that's probably nobody here. So again, you might be married to an American citizen, but your spouse is not in the United States. That's probably not the situation here. Okay, so actually, you would probably answer either A or B. So for example, take a look at this very first part of the question. So it says, you're 18 years old and you have been a permanent resident of the United States for at least 5 years, or you would choose B, have been a lawful permanent resident for at least 3 years, and you've been married and living with the same U.S. citizen spouse for the last 3 years, and your spouse is a U.S. citizen at the time you filed your N-400. So most of the people in this class would either choose A or you would choose B. Okay, now you don't have to tell me which answer you're going to choose, but most students would choose either A or B. So it depends on your situation. Okay, again, once in a while I get a student maybe who's married to an American citizen who is in the military. So that would be D, but that doesn't apply to most of you. Okay, now if you notice, my little note here says that the present perfect, you're going to be using it right at the beginning of this section. So again, the present perfect they use right away. Okay. Okay, so that's part one. Very simple. You would probably choose A or B. So do I have any questions over part one? Everybody okay with that one?
Don't have question.
Okay, good. So again, usually it's pretty simple. It's going to be probably one of those two choices. Okay, let's move on then to section 2. Section 2 is asking about your name. Okay, now here is something very interesting. On the application itself, it talks about in terms of the different names that my students use. Now, some of you, let's be honest, some of you come from countries where you might have 3 or 4 or 5 names. I've had students sometimes who've had many, many names, especially my Latino students, right? My Spanish-speaking students, that we usually have lots of names, right? You know, so I've had many students, Maria, Conchita, Alonso, so the problem, of course, is that usually on your permanent resident card, you're just putting your first and last, and maybe your middle name. Now, if you notice here in part 2, the first question talks about your family name. Now, family name is your last name. Okay, so that would be your last name. So notice on the application, it mentions your family name. So for example, everybody, do we know our family name? What would be our family name as your current legal name? So for example, Gisela, I notice you've got a hyphenated name, but Gisela, what is your family name?
Is Gisela Ibe Chirinos.
No, I don't want your whole name. I want your family name. So remember, your family name is your last name.
Oh, my last name right now is Jackie Warren.
So is that the information on your resident card, or is that on your driver's license, or is it on both?
Yeah, it's Jackie Warren now.
Okay, so for example, you would put the same answer for number 1 and maybe number 2. Sometimes students might have a different legal name from their permanent resident card. So guys, remember, you might have a different name. It just depends on which names you have on your documents. Okay, now Saba, what about you? What would be your family name?
D.
Okay, is that also the name you used on your permanent resident card?
Yes.
Okay, so again, it
It's
would
my
be,
name. It's my parent name. It's not
yeah.
my
So just
it's not my husband name.
okay. So again, it has to be the name that you used on your documents.
Yeah,
So just
it's
keep in
Warren.
mind that that's okay. Good. Okay. All right. Now let's look at the next question. The next question says given name. Okay. So your given name is also your first name. Okay. So for example, hopefully everyone knows their given name, and probably your given name is the same for question 1 and question 2. So for example, Belisario, if I asked you your given name, what would you say?
Belisario
Now, is that
Reynoso
no, just your given name, just your first name. So is Belisario Reynoso your given name?
Aguilar.
No, that would be your last name.
Oh, this
I
is my.
need to know. I need
Okay,
to know your given name. Your given name
okay,
is your first name.
okay. Belisario.
Excellent. Okay. So remember, guys, during the interview, they might ask you this question. They might say, what is your given name? And remember, given name means first name. Now, finally, sometimes they might ask you your middle name. Does anybody here have a middle name on any of their documents?
I think that is
No?
No.
very confused. Um,
Well, Elaine, what would be on yours? What would be your given name, Elaine? Would it be Elaine or would it be Yin Ling?
Yin Nang,
Okay. And then what would be your family name?
Lam.
Okay, good. Now, again, you will notice that in a moment, Elaine, that there is a place where you can put other names. So, for example, if you have Elaine, do you have Elaine on like a driver's license or anything?
No, no.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, so that's the idea, Elaine, is that you can put Elaine on the document, but not here. You would need to put the legal documented name that you have on your permanent resident card, on your driver's license. Okay, that's important. Let's see, Olena, I noticed that you have a kind of a different family name. So because I think you're married here. So Olena, what about you? What would be your family name that you use on your documents?
My family name, Varhatuk.
So, for example, if that's on your permanent resident card or on your driver's license, you would need to put that name. Now, I noticed that Barker is the name you're using now. Is that your legal name?
Yes, legal. Barker, now current.
So, is that on your permanent resident card?
Permanent resident.
Yeah, the green card.
I don't have green card.
Okay. Well, so when that happens, okay, so when that happens, that would be the information you would put for number 2, your permanent resident card. So I want to just remind everybody that sometimes I have students where maybe the driver's license is different from the permanent resident. Sometimes they might be different in that respect. Okay. So once again, guys, given name means first name. Family name means last name. So in the interview, they may ask you given name instead of first name. So just be clear, okay? All right, now, speaking of names, in part 2, as you continue to apply, you can mention other names that you've used. And now it says here, for example, including nicknames, aliases, and maiden name. So for example, Elena, maybe you would use your maiden name. That would be the name you had before you got married. But in terms of nicknames, okay, now, everyone, what is a nickname? What does that mean, nickname?
It's like a short name.
Could be. It could be.
Yeah. Like my daughter, her name is Tagreed. They can't say Tagreed and remember the name. They call her T.
Okay. Yeah, so especially if it's a name that might be on a document somewhere. Yeah, especially like if they, applied for a job or something like that. Now, Elaine, that would probably be you in this case. You would probably put Elaine here.
Yeah,
Yeah, because that would be your nickname.
yeah.
Okay. Now, for example, my full name is Jonathan. That's the name that's on most of my legal documents. But for example, maybe on credit cards or on other things, I just use the word John. So
John.
John, for example, would be my nickname, my given name that I might use here. Okay? So again, if you have any other names you've used, now guys, if some children gave you a nickname when you were a kid, don't put that on the application. Okay? So if somebody called you Shorty, for example, or some other crazy nickname, don't put it on the application. Okay, so sometimes children create nicknames. Don't put it on the application. Okay. All right. Now, if you notice question number 4, sometimes students might want to legally change their name. So, for example, I'm going to use Elena as an example. So, Elena, if you don't change your name on your documents, like the permanent resident card, so if you don't, when you apply, if it doesn't say Barker, for example, during the interview, you can legally change your name. The interview is a legal process. So if you want to change your name at that time, if you want Barker, for example, to be on all of your documents, you could check yes. But if you've already changed it, so before the interview, if you changed it legally, then you would put no. And I'm guessing most of you don't want to change your name at this point. So most of you would probably check no. But it just depends. Sometimes people, yeah, so for example, Yin Ling, right, Elaine, if you wanted to change it to Elaine and you have not changed it already, you can change it during the interview. And in fact, Elaine, if you want to do that, it might be a good idea to wait, because if you have all of your documents using Yin Ling and then you've got Elaine,
Yeah, I just
on
worry
the app.
about that. I just worry
Yeah.
about that.
So again, usually what I tell students is don't change anything, and then you can change it during the application process. So yes, you could change it to Elaine if you wanted to wait during that time, because then you would get your new passport, your new certificate of naturalization in the name
That
Elaine.
mean is after citizenship, and then we can
Right.
get the passport, right?
Right.
That is
Right.
the new passport. But
Well,
I
you would
try-
still have to. Well, you would still have to apply for the passport afterwards, but they would take your old passport. Yes. Yeah. But again, on your document of naturalization, they would use your new name. So then it would say Elaine, Lamb on your document. Okay. Okay. Now again, let's keep going through the application. So if you check no, that most people would probably put no, but still. Number 5 is Social Security number. Remember, I'm not going to ask you about that, but you need to remember it. You need to have your Social Security number memorized. The USCIS online account number. So that's if you apply online, they will give you an account number. That's where you would put it here. Nobody probably has an account number now, but when you apply, you would put it there. Okay. The rest of the questions look pretty simple. If you're male or female, your date of birth. Notice they say date of birth. They might say birthday. They might say, when were you born? Hopefully everybody remembers when you were born, right? Number 9, the date you became a lawful permanent resident would be the date you got your green card. Okay, so that would be the date you would put here. Now, let's look at questions 10 and 11. Your country of birth and your country of citizenship or nationality. Now, for most students, you would probably put the same answer, because most of you were probably born and became citizens in the same country. But sometimes I have students maybe who were born in one country and then moved to another country and became a citizen or a different nationality. So for example, maybe you were born, in Egypt, and then you became a citizen of Morocco, for example. So in this case, guys, you need to look at number 10 and number 11. Were any of you born and became citizens in different countries? Or were you born and a citizen in the same country where you were born?
In the same country.
Okay, so you would put the same answer for 10 and 11. Anybody else?
For me, I born
The same too.
in Hong Kong.
The same? Okay, good, Elaine.
The same.
Same. Elaine, I'm sorry, say it again, Elaine.
I said I born in Hong Kong, but citizenship now is China, right?
Yes.
I don't know.
Are you recognized as a Chinese citizen? Yeah. Yeah, so again, I think probably you would put the same answer for both. Yeah. Okay. All right, so again, most students usually put the same, but sometimes it happens. Sometimes I have students who were born in one country and became citizens of another country. Okay, let's continue. Now, another part of part 2 probably will not apply to anybody. For example, in question number 12, if you're taking this class, the answer is going to be no, because you do not have any physical or developmental disabilities, which means that you have any problems with answering questions during the English language or the civics test, the 100 questions. So pretty much everyone for these particular questions you're going to probably check no. If you checked yes, if you had any sort of medical conditions or situations, then you would have to file a different form, which is the N648. But generally, if you're taking this class and you're understanding what I'm saying, you're probably going to put no here. Also, it's true for question number 13. Nobody here in this group fits into these exemptions. That's because right now, most of you, even if you're 50, 55, or 65, these particular exemptions are for people who are older, who have been living in the United States for a long time. So, for example, if you're 50 and you've been a resident for 20 years, or if you're 55, let me use my pointer here. If you're 55 and you've lived here for 15 years, right? Or if you're 65 and you've lived here at least 20 years, that does not apply to probably anybody in this class. So in this case, you would check no for all of these answers, okay? So once in a while, I get a student who's older, but in this case, these probably do not apply to you, okay? So again, for the rest of part 2, you're probably checking no for all of these answers, okay? Now, same thing with part 3. So part 3 will be very quick here. For students who might have any disabilities or impairments, so basically if you have any mental issues or any physical disabilities that might make it difficult for you to apply. So if you notice, the first question asks for an accommodation. Now, generally what that means is an interpreter. For example, if you are deaf, which means you have trouble hearing, or if you're blind, which means you have trouble seeing, then you can request accommodations, someone to help you during this process. But again, pretty much every student who takes this class is going to put no. In this case, you have to have some particular legal document, some sort of medical document to give any sort of exemption. So the answer at this case is you're going to put no. And if you put no, then you don't have to answer these questions here, okay? So again, it says only if you answered yes. And probably most of you would put no for that answer, okay? And it's probably also true for part C. And again, I'll zoom in here. If you have another type of disability, so for example, if you're using a wheelchair, generally those kinds of accommodations are not for translation or interpreter. So for example, if you have a broken foot and you need just some help, or if you have a wheelchair, for example, and you need to make sure you go to a place that can accommodate wheelchairs, and again, in this case, you're not probably going to check this box either. Okay, so part 3 is pretty short and it will not apply to you. Okay, so I want to make sure we understand that part 3 probably does not apply to anybody in the class. Okay, all right, guys, we're almost finished here. So part 4 is very simple. It's phone numbers. So hopefully everybody here knows if they have these phone numbers, if you have a daytime phone number. For most people, it might be a cell phone. So notice they say mobile telephone for number 4. But the truth is many of us have cell phones, and maybe that's all you use is a cell phone. So you would use your daytime phone number. If you have an evening phone number, so for example, for me, I have a home phone, I might put for number 3. Now, I've highlighted the email address. Pretty much, guys, if you're applying for citizenship, everyone has to have an email address. So please, 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 make sure you spell your email address correctly. You'll be applying online, most of you, if you apply, so you'll need to have a correct email address, okay? So make sure you do that. So that part's pretty quick. Okay, finally, getting into the last part of our discussion this morning is information about your residence. Everyone, let's say that word together, residence.
Residence.
Okay, now residence is referring to where you have been living. So again, residence is where you live. So in this case, if you'll notice, there's one of those present perfect questions. Where have you lived during the last 5 years? Now remember, most of the questions on the application involve the last 5 years. So in this case, when I asked you earlier about your address, That was asking about your residence. Where have you been living? So let's zoom out for just a moment. Now, notice the very first question is talking about your current physical address. That means where are you living at this moment? The actual house or apartment where you're living. So if you notice, you have to put in your street number and the name, the city or town, the county, which for many of us might be Boone County or Kenton County, the state, zip code, and then notice if you have a foreign address, for example, maybe you were applying for citizenship but you lived in Canada, then you would fill out the province, postal code, and so on. For most of you, since you're living here in the United States, you'll only fill out these first parts here, okay? So again, you see here, that would be the parts you would fill out. Okay, now notice it says here, though, dates of residence. Now, I know some of you said you've been living there for 4 years or 2 months or whatever. So notice the very first part of this is having to put the date when you started living there, and of course, to this moment. It's the present, to right now. Now, guys, do you know the exact date when you moved into your current house or apartment? Do you know?
Yeah. Yes.
Kind of, yeah.
2017, November 3rd.
Oh, excellent. Okay. Well, many students don't know this information. So again, you have to find it. You have to find where the actual dates when you moved into that particular residence. Okay? Now, remember, the questions are only about the last 5 years. So on the document, you can list up to 5 addresses on the form. So there are actually spaces for 5 addresses. So if you've not moved a lot, so for example, Belisario mentioned he'd lived there for 4 years, then you won't need to put in, many other addresses. But sometimes I have students who've moved a lot. So for example, you have a space for your current address, but you might have to get some extra paper if you lived in 6 places or 7 places in the last 5 years. Now, just note though, on this part of the application, question B is asking about your current mailing address. So notice question A mentions physical address, and question B is mentioning mailing address. Sometimes I have students who maybe have a post office box, and a post office box would be that they get their mail at the post office. Whereas here, most of you probably get your mail in the same place, right? You get your mail at your house or apartment. So if you notice question B says, you only fill out this information if it's different, right? So in this case, does anybody have a different mailing address? Anyone? Anyone have a different mailing address?
No.
No? Okay. Yeah. Most of my students pretty much live and receive their mail in the same place. Okay. But remember, you can fill on the application, you will have space. I'll zoom out here. You have space where you can put up to 5 up to 5 different addresses. And if you need extra paper, you can. Okay. All right. Well, guys, we've covered the first 5 sections of the application. So I just want to review a couple of things. All right. So what I want to do real quickly is to ask you guys to help me. So let's go through real quickly and practice these questions by reading them. So for example, Belisario, can you read question number 1 for us?
What is your family name?
Now, Belisario, what is family name? Is that first name or last name?
Last name,
Exactly. So what's your last name, Belisario?
Reynoso Aguilar.
Excellent. Good answer. Okay. Gisela, would you read number 2 for us?
What is your nationality?
So how would you answer that question?
Peruvian.
Very good. All right. Elena, how about number 3?
Where were you born?
So, Elena, how would you answer?
Ukraine.
In the Ukraine.
I
What city? Be specific.
Ukraine, Vinnytsia region.
Okay, so remember, be very specific. So everybody in the group, make sure you mention the city and the country. Okay, so all right, very good. All right, Saba, you got number 4.
What's your current address? How long have you lived at this address?
Okay, so Saba, answer the first one. What's your current
Uh,
address?
it's it's 611 Sonoma Valley Court, Crestview, Kentucky.
Okay, and how
And
long?
it's 15 months.
Okay, very good. All right, Elaine, you got question number 5.
Do you have any nicknames?
And
And Elaine,
so yes, you do, right? I'm curious. Does anybody else in the group have a nickname? It has to be on something.
No.
So no. Okay. Well, Elena, yours is kind of short, so that's probably easy. Gisela, do you have any nicknames that people know you by?
No,
Okay.
not like you say in the application, but
Yeah.
I have my nickname when I was a little.
Yeah, I don't think we need that answer this
I
time.
know.
Yeah, so remember, guys, not the nickname when you were a kid, right? Okay. Okay, and finally, the given name. So, question, your given name. Who can tell me, what does given name mean?
First name?
Congratulations, first name. So everybody
First
here,
name.
hopefully, yeah, hopefully you know your first name. Okay. All right, very good. Okay, now finally, let's review some key vocabulary words that we learned today. All right, so everybody, you don't turn on your microphone, okay? Don't turn on your microphone, but just repeat these words with me, okay? So again, no mics, just repeat them. Residence.
Resident.
Yeah, so again, no microphones, no microphones. So residence, okay, so remember, residence is the place where you live. All right, everyone say the next word, disability. Okay. So remember, disability is a physical or mental limitation, such as an illness or disease. Probably this does not apply to you. Okay, everyone say the next one, given name. Okay, that means first name. Okay, next one, family name. Okay, that's your last name. Okay, and then finally, date of birth. And again, that means the day you were born. So notice they didn't say birthday, they said date of birth. So again, sometimes in the interview, they might use words that are a little bit different from the words that you might use every day. All right, let's return to the presentation because our time is just about up. So again, in terms of practicing for the interview, now we realize it's difficult for students to practice in class because we're trying to go through a lot of information. But I do want to mention to everyone that the N400 is not just about checking your answers. It is a chance to see if your English is good enough. So I need to be very clear with everyone. This is also an English test. When they ask you these questions, they want to make sure that you understand English. That's very important. So again, when I was practicing with some of those questions with you today, I wanted to see if your English was good enough. That's important. Now, during the interview, sometimes even before the interviewer might use what we call small talk. Now, small talk are the things that we do just to be friendly. For example, the interviewer might ask you, how are you doing? So, for example, if I said, oh, thank you for coming, Gisela, and how are you doing today? Gisela, how would you answer that question?
I'm doing very good.
Okay, there you go. Okay. So notice that particular question is just a little small talk to make you feel better. All right, here's another one. They might ask about the weather. So, for example, they might say, Elaine, how's the weather today? Do you like this weather?
a little bit chilly.
Okay, good. Yeah, so again, they might just ask about the weather. That's a very common thing to do in small talk. Okay, now here's a big question that sometimes we don't think about. The interviewer might ask you how you got to the interview today. How would you answer that question? How did you get to the interview today? What would be an answer for that question? Anybody know?
Does he ask me about how how I is it by car or by
Yeah, there you go. So how, like, did you come in a car, by
yeah
bus?
by
Yeah.
bus?
So in this
Yeah.
case, yeah. So, some of you might say, well, for example, my husband brought me, or I drove, I came by car, I came by bus. I don't think anybody here would say I came by helicopter, right? Would anybody say they came by helicopter? No, no, okay. Yeah, probably that'd be a little strange if you said I came by, a plane or a helicopter. Now, all of these are examples of small talk. So, what we're going to do here after class, and we're going to do this each week for the next 5 weeks, is to share some short videos with you to help you practice some of these things at home. So, after we're finished here today, I'm going to share a little video that will give you some examples of the kind of small talk that the interviewer might ask. So again, notice they will be a lot of the same ones we just practiced, thinking about the weather or how are you today or how did you get here today. So again, every time I send you something in your email, please, please, please practice. Practice with it. Look at the questions and practice with the video. Now, also after class today, I will send everyone a digital copy of the N400. Now, this will not be your official application, at least not right now. So the idea is you can use that to help kind of fill out the information as we go along. Now, of course, you can look at all of the application if you want to, but each week we're going to focus on a different part of the application. So again, today we just looked at parts 1 through 5. So 1 through 5 were the first sections of the interview. But again, you can practice with this at home using the digital copy. Okay, guys, we ran a little long here this morning, but I want to see if we have any questions.